You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Media Opinions. It's been a while since I've done one of these, but I decided it was time to finally get back and do another one. As you should be able to tell by the title, today we'll be talking about fighting games. Now, fighting games have a pretty wide spectrum of what is included. There's tournament fighters, there's things like Super Smash Bros., there's things like Mortal Kombat, there's Street Fighter, Dead or Alive, Virtua Fighter. There's a lot, right? There's a lot of different fighting games and a lot of different kinds of fighting games. 3D aesthetic, 2D aesthetic, 3D or 2D space as far as like movement. There's some that are sort of like beat-em-up fighter hybrids. There's a bunch of different types. There's also subgenres, things like wrestling games I think you could kind of lump in, but are also kind of their own thing. The only one I really grew up with as an actual fighting game was Mortal Kombat, my introduction being Mortal Kombat 4, and I did a whole nostalgic gaming stories on Mortal Kombat 4. But Mortal Kombat is the only fighting game series that I really got super into. There were a couple of others that I played a decent amount of. For instance, I did play quite a lot of Dead or Alive 1 and 2, and a decent amount of Dead or Alive 3. But I didn't really play anything later than that. I have played a little bit of Street Fighter here and there, but I've never been the biggest Street Fighter guy. And I'm played, a decent amount of Super Smash Bros. Here and there, but again, it's not really my favorite. Mortal Kombat is my favorite fighting game series, just because I like the gore, I like the characters. I think Scorpion's a way cooler character than any other fighting game character. I think the combos are just the right amount of complexity. They're not too crazy to pull off, but they still require a decent amount of inputs depending on what special moves you're pulling off, what combos you're doing, things like that. My favorite Mortal Kombat game is Mortal Kombat Deception, with a close second being Armageddon, followed by Shaolin Monks, and then Mortal Kombat 9, Mortal Kombat 4, and so on. Now, with the Mortal Kombat games, I think the last truly great Mortal Kombat game was Mortal Kombat 9, which is the one that was just called Mortal Kombat when they rebooted it. Mortal Kombat X, I was pretty disappointed in. There was a couple of characters that I liked. I played a decent amount of it. I beat the whole story mode. But overall, I didn't like most of the new characters, and I hated what they did with some of the old characters, and I just didn't really feel it, And then 11 came out, and there was just a bunch of dumb shit in that game. Like, Jax's ending was absolutely atrocious. There were all these little quips of dialogue that I heard that I hated, and I just didn't overall like it. It just felt like X, but, worse. Gameplay-wise, it was fine, but it didn't really do anything that X didn't already do, and X itself was already built kind of on the framework of Mortal Kombat 9. Not to say that they need to always mix it up, and there are little differences between each of them, to be fair, but I never really got into it. I played a little bit of 11 at a coworker's house one time, and, again, gameplay-wise it was fine, but I hated the story. And, Mortal Kombat isn't one you think of being very story-heavy, but I actually do care about the story and characters, even if there are a lot of inconsistencies in characters who have died multiple times canonically, because the canon is kind of a mess. Not to mention the other timelines starting with Mortal Kombat 9. And then there's yet another timeline starting with the new game, Mortal Kombat 1, and then there's Mortal Kombat 2. Again, not to be confused with the original Mortal Kombat 1 and 2. I think the naming conventions are fucking retarded now. And a bunch of the new changes are just, changes for the sake of changing it, like making Bi-Han into Scorpion. So literally turning Sub-Zero into Scorpion. How stupid is that? But I've already talked about how Mortal Kombat fell off and stuff in my other videos. But yeah, Mortal Kombat, it's my favorite fighting series. But I did play a good amount of Dead or Alive 1 and 2, because I got the Xbox set Dead or Alive 1 and 2 Ultimate. Now, Dead or Alive 2 was the one I preferred out of the two, and the character that I always played as was Bass. Now, a lot of people love to go in and play as the chicks in the skimpy outfits, and yeah, there's obviously an appeal to that, but I always just liked playing as Bass because he was like Fat Hulk Hogan, he's an old retired wrestler, and he moves slow, but he hits like a fucking truck. He deals so much damage that he's just so cheap to use, and I fucking love it. Now, obviously, any competent player can easily counter it, but I played Dead or Alive recently when Theron came over on Thursday, and I played as Bass, and I just fucking destroyed him. It was really funny. To be fair, we had played Battlefront 2, the original, and he kept spamming Force Push at me, so I got mad, and then I played that, and I also kicked his ass at Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, because I knew Shaolin Monks was the one he wouldn't know how to play, because it plays differently than the others, and it's one of my favorites, so obviously I know how to play it. But I also played a good amount of wrestling games back in the day, the SmackDown vs. Raw series being my favorite, especially the original SmackDown vs. Raw. I've only recently played 2006, I've heard that one's the best one, but I haven't played a ton of it. But I did play a good amount of SmackDown, SmackDown 2 Know Your Role, SmackDown Just Bring It. I played a little bit of Here Comes the Pain. I also played Raw 2. I never played Raw 1, and then I played some of the 64 ones, you know, WrestleMania 2000, ECW Hardcore, WCW versus NWO, and then I also played WCW Backstage Assault on the PS1 at one point. I played a lot of wrestling games. You know what wrestling game is probably like the most underrated wrestling game? TNA Impact on the 360. That game is fucking great. It literally created a wrestler just for the game that they later put into actual matches, which I thought was pretty cool. Yeah, I never really got into Street Fighter all that much. When I did play it, I would typically play as either M. Bison, Blanca, or Guile. I played as Vega a little bit too. I thought he was kind of cool. But I didn't play a ton of Street Fighter. I did play a little bit. I played through Smash Brothers Brawl's Slipspace Emissary, the story mode, and that was fun enough. But again, I'm not the biggest fan of just the percentage thing. I much prefer just health bars. I guess I like simplicity in my fighting games to an extent. And obviously, since I'm a fan of Mortal Kombat, I like the gore, which is definitely a factor that carried it over a lot of the other franchises of the time. Certainly not competitive when it comes to fighting games because I'm not very good at them. But I do enjoy playing them, especially when they have a story mode. Mortal Kombat's Conquest mode was always a favorite of mine, hence why Deception is my favorite. Armageddon also has a great Conquest mode, and Shaolin Monks is literally a story-based Mortal Kombat sort of beat-em-up fighting game hybrid, which is why, again, that one's pretty high up for me as well. One thing about modern fighting games that you don't see as much as you did in older fighting games is you don't see unlockables as much, which really pisses me off, because unlockables was always a cool thing to have. Like, you progress through the game, you unlock new characters, you unlock new costumes, you unlock new arenas, you unlock new moves and fatalities and things. But nowadays, everything's just DLC, or it's all unlocked at the start. And having it all unlocked at the start, I can kind of understand, but I don't like, because I like the idea of progression. For instance, when I bought Mortal Kombat Complete Edition, which was the all DLC included Mortal Kombat 9, it had all the characters unlocked from the start. Now, I had previously rented the game from, it was either Gamefly or Blockbuster, I can't remember, it was so long ago. Probably Gamefly. Point is, we rented Mortal Kombat 9, and I had unlocked some stuff. And so that was cool. But then when we returned it, I eventually bought it, but I bought the Complete Edition because I wanted all the stuff. It was all unlocked at the start, which I was like, oh, that's kind of lame. So I don't have to unlock all this shit, so when I unlocked it on my main profile, there was no point to that. That's the problem I have with the current model of fighting games. Mortal Kombat lately just seems to be interested in just DLC. They care more about releasing a bunch of guest characters than actually focusing on making the next game, or making alternative modes. Like, why don't we get things like Conquest, or Puzzle Combat, or Chess Combat, or Kart Combat? Why don't we get all of this stuff anymore? It used to be really cool to have all this different shit and variety in these games. But now it's just fighting game, 2.5D, with a story that's very simplistic, which, you know, I could deal with all that if it wasn't all just the same shit and they hadn't fucking, like, ruined a lot of the staples of the franchise for me. But yeah, I enjoy fighting games. I think it's a fun genre, but I am kind of particular with it, and I'm certainly not competitive with it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this somewhat rambly episode of Media Opinions. This has been Fugitive Red Eye. Have a good one. Toodle.
You take forever to say nothing.
Subscribe to Fugitive Red Eye.